In today's video I'll be recapping a film from 2002 titled, The Tuxedo. Before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe for more movie recaps. At Banning Springs, a bottled water factory in Toronto, undercover Special Agent Wallace is testing the product for a specific pathogen. He suddenly rushes into a concealed area and makes a call to the Central Security Agency. He alerts the woman who answers the call that the operation has reached critical mass, and he needs his partner, Clark Devlin, urgently. As the woman puts him on hold, he is attacked by a man who had been spying on him from the top of one of the metal racks. The man places a bag over his head, and, using a piping system connected to a tank of water on his back, he proceeds to drown Agent Wallace. Outside an art gallery in Toronto City, a taxi driver named Jimmy Tong longs to be with the beautiful saleswoman inside. His friend tells him to go talk to her, which he reluctantly agrees to. He goes inside, and then begins to hesitate. Her boss then approaches him, and advises him to introduce himself to her as quick as possible, so that she can reject him faster. His words are enough to send Jimmy's confidence crumbling to the floor, and he retreats to his taxi. A moment later, the saleswoman finishes her shift. Jimmy rushes out to attempt talking to her again, but as he opens the door, a large burly man on a bicycle slams into the door and flips right over onto his back. Now fuming, he tries to attack Jimmy, breaking the window and denting in the roof, while Jimmy cowers beneath the car. His friend then confronts the man, who attempts to attack him too, but retreats when he spots an officer approaching the scene. Jimmy's friend asks why he didn't bust out some karate moves, to which he replies that not all Chinese can fight like Jackie Chan. When Jimmy enters the car to straighten out the roof from inside, he is surprised to find a woman named Stina waiting patiently for him to arrive. She asks if he can get her to 70 Fleming Street, and he agrees. Along the way, we can see that Stina is no ordinary passenger, as she's been researching Jimmy's history on her super high-tech half PSP. She then offers Jimmy a challenge. She says that if he can get her to the address by the time she's done her makeup, she'll pay double what she owes him. Jimmy gladly obliges. He speeds through as many shortcuts as he can, even reversing into oncoming traffic to get to the destination, all while Stina calmly does her makeup. When he gets there, Stina offers him a job for $2,000 a week as a chauffeur for her client, Mr. Clark Devlin. He takes the job on the spot and meets Stina in her office the next morning for a briefing. He is given a list of strict rules to adhere to, including never speaking directly to Mr. Devlin. On the drive, he finds out that Clark is actually a pretty nice guy, who tells him not to care much for the rules. At CSA headquarters, Agent Wallace's body is being examined after it was found in his hotel room. The doctors come to a conclusion that Wallace had slipped, hit his head and fell into his bathtub in which he drowned. As the lead investigator, Winston Chalmers, considers the doctor's conclusion, one of the medical investigators, Ms. Del Blaine, suggests that Wallace didn't drown. Instead, he was murdered. She says that oddly enough, he had water in his lungs, but collapsed platelets in his pulmonary vein, indicating that he died from thirst. And the water in his lungs wasn't ordinary tap water but bottled spring water which contains an unknown strain of bacteria. The senior investigator takes a keen interest in her talents, suggesting they could be utilized in the field. He schedules a meeting with her to potentially have her work alongside Clark Devlin. That afternoon, Clark visits the local insectarium to closely examine a particular bug. There, he flirts with the beautiful young woman at the front desk and convinces her to attend a fundraiser for the Natural History Museum held at his place. On their way back to the car, Jimmy asks Clark how he learned to be so smooth with the ladies, to which he replies that Jimmy has the same instincts as he does, only he lacks the confidence. That night, Clark dances with that same woman at his place while Jimmy watches in awe. Being as smooth as he is, Clark effortlessly slides across the floor and even extends himself forward without losing his balance during their dance. When they're done, the waiter walks past and trips while walking down the stairs with a tray of drinks. But smooth Mr. Devlin comes to his rescue with a move that looks like it was ripped right from the Matrix. As Jimmy is putting away the suit he borrowed for the event, his eye is caught by Mr. Devlin's stunning tuxedo, displayed and encased in glass. He looks at his reflection and tries his best to impersonate Mr. Devlin's smooth British accent and thick Chinese. Out of curiosity, he attempts to find a way to open the protective glass so he can get a closer look at the suit. Just then, he sees Mr. Devlin's smooth reflection in the glass. He quickly turns around to see Clark with a serious expression in his eyes as he sternly tells Jimmy that he has only one rule: to never touch his tuxedo. He tells Jimmy to bring the car around so that they can go out to dinner. As they're driving, Clark sketches a diagram of an insect with some notes on a page, which he then tears off and folds up. When they arrive at Burger King, Clark orders a huge meal for Jimmy, which surprisingly, is ready the second he finishes ordering. Mr. Devlin then orders a crispy crust pizza, which surprisingly again, is on the menu. Jimmy brushes it off, believing it must be a new item they're selling, but it appears there was no pizza and Clark came to pick up a letter containing some secret information pertaining to the case he's currently working. As they leave, a man on a skateboard comes out of nowhere and is hit by the car. As he stalls, another one of his friends attaches a tracking device to the back of the car. When they continue to drive ahead, he attaches a bomb to the bottom of his skateboard and sets it towards Mr. Devlin informs Jimmy that the skateboard is in fact a bomb and they need to get as far from it as possible. Jimmy tries his best, but eventually they come to a dead end, and Mr. Devlin manages to push Jimmy to safety before the bomb explodes. For a moment, it seems they both made it out unharmed, but Clark begins to bleed out of the side of his head and falls to the ground. Jimmy asks him who did this, and he gives him a name, Walter Strider. Jimmy then calls an ambulance, and Clark tells him not to involve the police and to trust no one. As Jimmy is giving the details to the dispatcher, Clark changes all of the information on his ID, and his new name, which Jimmy gives to the dispatcher, is Brad Dilford. He also gives Jimmy his watch and tells him to wear it. At the hospital, Jimmy tries to read the letter Clark had picked up, but it burns up the moment he opens it. The nurse tells him that Clark will recover, and she also gives him the sketch of the insect he drew, which he had clutched in his palm. At Banning Springs floating headquarters, we are introduced to the antagonist, CEO of Banning Springs, Mr. Dietrich Banning. He along with his mad scientist Dr. Sims, are holding a meeting with one of the higher-ups in his company, Mr. Lundy. Banning is annoyed that Lundy doesn't believe in the large projections he has for his company, and also, he doesn't like his hair. He offers Lundy a glass of spring water, and Lundy immediately becomes thirsty. As he dries up, they explain to him that their new product, water that makes you thirsty, contains bacteria which dumps loads of electrolytes into your bloodstream, causing dehydration. The only problem is that it works too quickly. Immediately, Mr. Lundy dries up completely, from the inside out, and finally succumbs to extreme dehydration. When Jimmy returns to Mr. Devlin's home to retrieve his things, he walks over to the suit, noticing that the watch now signals towards it. The glass casing detects the watch's signal and removes itself, allowing Jimmy to touch the tuxedo. He puts it on, and then, the suit adjusts itself perfectly to his proportions. Hundreds of little micro-scanners within the fabric then begin to map his neurological structure as a zap of electricity runs through his nerves and stimulates his muscles, allowing him to tie his bow tie even though he didn't know how to initially. A robotic voice in the suit tells him that this is a tactical uniform, and the wristwatch is ready for him to use. He scrolls through the watch, citing a lot of options in alphabetical order, for him to choose from. He decides to try a demonstration, but mistakenly selects demolition. The suit immediately goes to work, destroying everything in its path. Jimmy then ends up on the ceiling after selecting anti-gravity mode. When he falls to the ground, Del Blaine calls him, believing that he is Clark Devlin, which he goes along with, to inform him that she's been put on the case. She tells him that Banning is holding a meeting with the CEOs of other spring water companies, and the agency wants them to find out what he's planning. Jimmy then goes to meet Del Blaine at a secret location. She is surprised to see that the sexy super secret agent Clark Devlin is a little Chinese man. She leads him to the top of a tower looking over Banning's headquarters aboard his ship. She instructs him to assemble the rifle and shoot a small listening device onto one of the people heading towards the meeting. With the aid of the suit, he quickly assembles the rifle and shoots the device. As Del listens in on the conversation, she finds out that Banning has developed the first and only filtration process to protect bottled water from being contaminated by the bacteria, which he's led everyone to believe was an act of Mother Nature rather than his evil biological plan. He asks that each of the CEOs hand over 50% of their companies to him in order for him to allow them the use of his process, or else their companies will be doomed. Just then, Jimmy is attacked by some nearby henchmen who spotted them, while Del remains oblivious to it all as she continues to listen in on the meeting. Eventually, she realizes what's happening and switches to combat mode. The tuxedo then switches to auto response and helps Jimmy fight off the bad guys, before he is knocked off balance and ends up hanging from the tower. Del takes out the last henchman and attempts to pull Jimmy up, but he ends up slipping and falling off the tower. Believing that he's died, Del rushes away from the scene. While falling, the tuxedo dispenses some sort of sticky tech which allows Jimmy to grab onto a pipe and climb back up. When he gets back to the top, he rushes down the tower and tries to signal his location to Del, but some nearby pipes fall down and one hits him in the head, knocking him into a vat of cement. Del gets to Clark's car and speeds away as Jimmy gets out of the cement and runs so fast that he catches up with the car and gets in. The next day, While Jimmy is visiting Mr. Devlin at the hospital, Dell calls him to inform him of their next surveillance mission at the Langford Hotel, where Banning will be entertaining 3 of his new partners. When they arrive at the hotel, Dell places a hidden spy camera onto Jimmy's suit. Dell manages to get them inside through the back entrance. They enter a dressing room, where they meet the legendary King of Soul, James Brown. James, who happens to be working with the CSA, promises them front seat tickets to his performance. When he taps Jimmy on the back, the suit's auto response kicks in, and flips James onto his head, knocking him out cold. Dell rushes onto stage and tries to stall, while Jimmy uses the suit's voice changing system to alter his vocal cords, allowing him to sing just like James Brown. He begins to dance for the audience, and gets right up in Banning's face. He manages to win over the girl accompanying Banning, but Banning doesn't care much as she's just another thought. After the dance, Jimmy introduces himself to the attendees at Banning's table. Banning pulls out a cigarette, and before he can light it, the suit automatically dispenses a lighter and proceeds to light it for him. Jimmy asks the girl, named Cheryl, to dance so that he can isolate and get more information about Banning from her. As they dance, Dell comes over and flirts with Banning, but they are interrupted by one of his henchmen who informs him that she works for the CSA. Later, Cheryl takes Jimmy upstairs to her room. As she puts a cigarette to her lips, Jimmy witnesses the same automatic response from the suit. She soon gets handsy, and begins to undress him, throwing his coat with the spy camera onto a chair, which Dell Blaine, who is sitting at the pool side, observes the situation from. After she removes his pants, he gets her to go into the bathroom to get the bath ready. Banning's henchmen then break into the room and attack him as he puts the pants back on. The pants fights off all of the henchmen, and after witnessing Dell Blaine being drowned by another in the pool, it launches one of the bad guys onto the one that's drowning her, saving her life. Later, while Jimmy treats Dell's wound, she tells him that while flirting with Banning, he mentioned to her that when he can't sleep at night, he goes down to his lab to work, revealing that his secret evil lab must be at his home. At the CSA headquarters, Stina reviews the footage from the spy cam and discovers that Jimmy is pretending to be Clark. Jimmy and Dell attend a party held at Banning's mansion. While they're dancing, they slowly work their way out of the crowd and into the backyard. There, Jimmy mistakenly kicks a rock into the pool, but instead of sink, it slides across the surface. He walks onto the pool, and steps right in the middle, while Dell leans over the diving board, triggering the doors and opening up the entrance to the hidden lab beneath the pool. When they enter, they find a map that has targets set on all of the national reservoirs in the country. Dell checks out the computer and finds out about the dehydrating water, yet she doesn't know how Banning plans to release the bacteria without it being traced back to him. 2 guards then spot them on the security camera, but Jimmy uses the suit's camouflage tech to conceal himself and Dell from them. When they get back to the dance, Stina calls Dell and informs her of who Jimmy really is. She then leads him into a bathroom and at gunpoint, she demands he remove the suit. As she leaves with the suit, one of the henchmen recognizes her and takes her to Banning. She offers him the suit, claiming to have turned against the CSA in order to help him carry out his plan, which surprisingly, he believes. She then turns on a GPS tracking device on her necklace, which signals the CSA that Banning's lab has been found. When Jimmy gets back to Clark Devlin's place, he realizes that the name Walter Strider was a mistake on his part. Instead, Clark was giving him the name of a particular insect, a water strider. An insect that can literally walk on water. At the lab, Banning explains to Dell how he plans to target all of the reservoirs with the bacteria, which will be carried by the water striders and dumped onto the water surfaces. He then tries on the tuxedo, and allows the suit to demonstrate its acrobatic abilities. Back at Clark's home, Jimmy decides to quit. As he packs his things, he finds a tactical tuxedo left by Mr. Devlin for him, with a note encouraging him to do the right thing. At the lab, Banning asks Dell why she chose to work for him. As she's about to reply, a security breach alarm goes off. Believing it's the CSA, she begins to tell him how she planned for him to get caught. It turns out the breach was Jimmy, who has been apprehended. Before Banning can kill Jimmy, the suit fights back, taking out all of the bad guys and returning to fight Banning. Before the water striders can be released by Dr. Sims, Dell spills water all over the controls, causing the hatch to malfunction and close itself. Banning uses the suit's anti-gravity to get up to the hatch and open it manually, before returning to subdue both Jimmy and Dell. As he chokes the both of them out, Jimmy grabs a cigarette out of Banning's pocket and puts it in Dell's mouth, causing Banning's suit to react by letting go of Jimmy and lighting the cigarette. Jimmy uses the time to attack Banning and knock him out. Jimmy and Dell then notice that the Striders are free, but haven't yet flown away. They realize that the Striders have been waiting to follow the Queen Strider, which hasn't yet been released. Jimmy quickly disengages the Queen Strider's capsule, which sets off the security alarm once again. As they try to flee from more of Banning's henchmen, they drop and break the capsule, setting free the Queen. The Queen flies around the lab and settles on Dell's nose. Jimmy then traps it with a cup and continues to fight off the bad guys while sealing the cup over Dell's face. Eventually, Banning regains consciousness, and as he runs towards them, Jimmy throws the Strider into Banning's mouth. All of the other Striders then follow the Queen and enter Banning's mouth, dehydrating and drying out his body. The CSA then arrives, and the head investigator thanks Jimmy and Dell for their service. Sometime in the future, Jimmy heads into the art gallery to ask out the saleswoman. As her boss approaches him once again, he is neutralized and dragged away by an undercover agent. Jimmy tries to talk to the woman with a hidden earpiece feeding him advice from Dell, a now healthy and smooth Clark Devlin, and a number of other undercover CSA agents. All of their mashed up input becomes inaudible to Jimmy, who becomes frustrated and complains about the voices in his head. When he tries to talk to the woman, he comes off too strong and seems kinda crazy. She becomes frightened and threatens him with a can of mace before kicking him out. Outside, Dell approaches Jimmy and makes fun of his failed attempt. They both get into an argument and eventually come to admit that there's been some chemistry between them. They then decide to go get a coffee together. The end. Thanks so much for watching.